Hello, spooky friends, and welcome to the podcast. Today, we'll talk about cryptids. What is the definition of a cryptid? Also, we're joined today by a special guest, Liz of Planet Lizdom. Welcome, Liz.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. We're happy
Who
to have
I want to
you.
make note is not a cryptid.
Well, we don't know.
You know, I do have green hair, and I
Yeah.
do love anthropomorphic creatures.
This is true.
She's devastatingly enchanting.
This is true.
Yeah, you haven't heard me sing.
So, definition of cryptid.
An animal, such as the Sasquatch or the Loch Ness Monster, that has been claimed to exist but has never been proven to exist. So, those are two examples. I know that we've talked before, and I know Liz and I have
there's
talked about
so
this.
many.
We have favorite cryptids.
Yeah, there's so many.
One of mine is the Goatman of Goatman's Bridge.
Yeah.
So allegedly it's this man who was cursed by the devil. I'm trying to pull up exactly the story of it because I don't remember all the details, and it is an urban legend. So I always say this, and I preach this on TikTok specifically. Urban legends vary per region, and every time we are talking about a cryptid story, it could be different in different regions of the world. And I say that with a very much intensity and an intense way because people will get really angry about misrepresentation. However, cryptids aren't proven to exist, so we have to, go with what we know.
Yeah.
So the Goatman is a creature resembling a goat human, and he's credited often with canine deaths, so I'm not a big fan of that part. But he's purported to take refuge specifically in Maryland. There's a bridge there called
Interesting.
Goatman's Bridge. And
Well, the way he's depicted, he looks like a pan.
he's kind of sexy.
Well, I was going to say, he looks like a Grecian cryptid, really.
Like a pan, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's kind of sexy. So there are a lot of variations of this story. There was one, they said he was a scientist who worked in Beltsville Agricultural Research Center, and he did an experiment on goats which backfired and mutilated him. And then he's become this creature that now aggressively attacks people. There's another story that says like he is a man who was possessed by the devil, and there's the Pope-like monster. I mean, there's a lot of variations, but I just find it so fun that like there could be like a man goat running around out there, just.
Well, I'm curious to know, what time of year are these sightings usually happening? Because it is wintertime right now. Is the Goatman really running around?
Does he go into
topless?
hibernation?
Does he need snowshoes?
Yeah.
Does he wear sorels? I'm curious to know what the modern cryptid is doing.
Well, there are different cryptids for different seasons. Maybe they come out. Like we talk all the time about how we find like the Sasquatch real sexy, and how if I could find a man that looks like him, I'd be set for life, like a big mountain man,
Yeah.
Sure.
Sasquatch kind of guy. But
Teach their own.
I mean, that's for a winter. I don't think he'd be that fun in the summer.
No, on the beach he would be miserable. Oh my gosh.
Same. Honestly, I lack the melanin.
Yeah.
But Mysterion, what's your favorite cryptid?
Oh, it has to be the vegetable lamb of Tartary, which is a very obscure cryptid, but one
Yeah.
that I actually have tattooed
On your
right
belly?
here on my belly, if you can see that.
We'll post pictures later.
So the story of the Tartary lamb is that it is a lamb or an animal of some type that grows from a tree, and the connects to its navel, and then the animal can eat the foliage around its allotted area. But then once it's consumed up whatever it's in its area, it starves to death and dies.
Oh.
So the idea was that the meat of the Tartary lamb had medicinal properties. Its wool could be used for different things like making armor. Really unusual cryptid. And from what I can gather, this was a cryptid that evolved from the definition of the cotton plant.
Oh.
So if somebody saw a cotton plant and word of mouth, it looked like a sheep growing out of a lamb growing out of a tree. And then did you hear he saw a lamb growing out of a tree? And then if you go to Algiers, there's a lamb growing out of a tree. And then this sort of medieval myth was born. And people would go on these pilgrimages to try to find the Tartary lamb. And a lot of them were duped into paying for information and essentially it was always, the answer was just over that hill. And you would just keep going, and you would never find it because it doesn't exist.
Wow.
And one of my favorite of all, and I love it so much because it is just so out there. It's so out there.
Interesting. That's a good one. Liz, what are your thoughts? What do you have of cryptid love?
Well, it's funny. You would think with the green hair that the siren would be my favorite cryptid. Yeah. And she is. Not because she has a tail and beautiful hair, but she has fangs. But actually, more specifically, I am really fascinated by the Baba Yaga.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
It could be my partial Estonian heritage.
Yeah.
It could be a kitchen witchiness. But I'm very, very fascinated by the idea of Baba Yaga. I mean, the chicken feet on her hut, or holding up her hut, and the fact that
on Fowl's legs.
On Fowl's legs, I mean, that is exactly me every day.
That is Now,
is she considered a cryptid, or is she considered a folklore or more mythological character?
I think the lines are fairly blurred with her, just because if you think about the definition of a cryptid, and the local legends and that sort of thing, I think she's very much in the gray area, and that's kind of how I am. I'm very much in the gray area.
Right.
So to me, whenever I think of a cryptid, I do think of Baba Yaga, but I also think of, a local legend and perhaps cautionary tale.
So which local legend would you say you navigate towards?
So I would say I navigate towards the one where, do not cross Baba Yaga. Do what she says. Yeah. Do what your parents say, because if you get lost in the forest and Baba Yaga finds you, say goodbye to everything you know and love, because you were forevermore her slave.
And there's so many stories and cryptids that are warnings. Don't go into the forest.
Yeah.
The First Nations of Canada in the northern part of Ontario and up into the Arctic area, there is the Simmoki, which is almost a goblin type cryptid who, the further you go into the forest, you enter Simmoki territory, and he will snatch you up and take you into his lair and I guess maybe eat you or turn you into a Simmoki. I'm not sure what they do to you once they get you, but you're gone. It's over.
The end of tax season.
The end of tax season. So there's so many different don't go into the forest type stories, whether it be a cryptid or a creature or a wolf or anything to essentially keep children or wandering curious people safe.
But you know what, though? There's the legend of don't go into the forest, and as a kid I would have been screwed. A Baba Yaga would have taken me. But there's also this predatory type of cryptid that's out there. So, for instance, take the chupacabra.
Sure.
Literally translates to goat sucker, which I find hilarious in Spanish. Like, I can't keep a straight face. But this is a predatory animal that would literally take your livestock and kill them. And there's many examples of this. I'm wondering, is this just someone's way of explaining that their animals have gone missing and killed, or like what is there actually something out there? Because I remember watching a documentary on the chupacabra as a teenager. It was the first cryptid I'd ever really known about other than Bigfoot, and I watched this whole documentary thinking this thing was real the whole time, and watching these animals be mutilated in such a specific way. These examples, are they real or
no?
What's
I
going
think
on
that
here?
they're stretches of the imagination to explain everything from a wolf attack or your chicken coop being damaged by other predatory animals. And the concept of a chupacabra is again a interesting explanation to what's going on. Or somebody saw a sickly dog that was diseased and had fur clumps hanging off of it and looked like it just literally walked out of a grave, and gave it this, a game of broken telephone. As the story goes on, it becomes a monster. Now it becomes a bloodsucker. Now it's sucking. Now I saw it. I saw one too, and it was eating the goats. It just sort of comes from this natural, real thing. Like, if you think about the idea of something like the Bigfoot or Yeti or Sasquatch, it doesn't matter what part of the world you're in, you're going to see mountain lions, you're going to see bears, you're going to see other people, and you're going to...
My future husband.
Your future husband, maybe. Somewhere. And you're going to, find that most cultures are not going to have an explanation for what this creature was that they saw. So they're going to go back and they're going to say, hey, listen, up on those hills, there's a giant monster. Don't go up there. When in reality, it could have been a grizzly. It could have been anything.
Well, and a lot of these can be origin stories for fairy tales as well. And again, it's the whole cautionary tale trying to explain the unexplained. And I find fairy tales and cryptids very often will overlap a little bit because if you look at characters in fairy tales, they're also cryptid in nature.
Yeah, that's true.
Look at Jack and the Beanstalk.
True, and also in England specifically, like my family's from England, they would tell stories about these. They called them English lions. And people actually thought that there was lions prowling around in England. They were these big cats that were ripping apart livestock and killing wayward people.
But they were really there.
But it could have been. There's actually evidence to suggest that there were actual lions in England at some point.
No, they weren't. They were some sort of, not more like a lion, more like a cougar. They were these wild cats that did exist. They were sighted legitimately.
Well, some people thought they were aliens until this happened. They actually caught it on camera, but it's really grainy footage, and it's kind of like catching Bigfoot.
Right. Which, speaking of which, I have a Bigfoot cast here.
That's a Bigfoot. Wow. Can you imagine the dumps this guy must have? Massive.
This
imagine
is
the Jordans that he wears. Oh my
size
gosh.
22, Andre the Giant size.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
Where did you get
got
that
great
from?
arches.
Oh, I've had this for years. Now,
it's a plaster foot of Bigfoot, by the way, for our listeners.
For our listeners, if you're not watching us on YouTube. So, Carl from the... What is this place called that I perform at in California? I'm having a bit of a...
Magic Castle?
No.
The CIA?
The CIA. The California Institute of Abnormal Arts. Carl's uncle is the man who...
Found this?
No, who discovered and said the name Bigfoot. Created the name
really?
Bigfoot.
No.
Yes, 100%.
Wild.
Yeah, and so of course the infamous Bigfoot footage of the 60s that was purportedly filming of Bigfoot, where you can clearly see a zipper on his costume.
I missed that as a kid. I thought it was real.
Oh, yeah.
Me too.
I swore up and down.
I still do.
I have a book here. It's called Animal Fakes and Frauds by Peter Dance. It's from the 70s. And it's an amazing book because it covers all sorts of different creatures that go back into the Egyptian times. And so you have things like the chimera, which is, of course, a combination of a lion, a goat, and a whole bunch of other animals. You have the griffin, right?
Well, what's really interesting, and Liz, this reminds me of you every time, is mermaids being a big thing. And in Scottish culture, we have kelpies.
Yes,
kelpies.
Yeah, so there's a lot of water-based creatures because I think it's so unknown to us, the water.
Absolutely.
But mermaids and kelpies and water creatures, it actually goes back to ancient times.
Oh, absolutely.
We in Scotland, before the Romans really came through, there was an ancient story passed on of this queen of all demons, the queen of everything, Huirnach was her name. And she was very much in touch with the water, and she actually had creatures that would come out of the water and do her bidding until St. Peter defeated her, and she's now hiding in a cave with her little demon babies. And they were cast back in the water. But
sounds about right.
It actually sounds like the root of what mer people would have been. These creatures that come from the water to do her bidding, and they would take people in. And that's why a lot of the time Scottish people will believe in sirens and will believe in kelpies because they think that it's Cuerdenach's army.
Absolutely. Well, and look at the Scottish weather. The ocean is so incredibly unforgiving and tempestuous.
Yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me at all to be dragged down to the depths by a kelpie or a mer person.
Or a kraken.
So how are you going to prove that this type of creature exists? There's a lot of examples of fakes that surfaced in the 1600s until, even to this day. And a great example of one such creature is the Jenny Hanover, which is a almost sea fairy type creature. Yeah. And what it really is, and this is how they're illustrated, but what it really is a skate that's been modified, or a fish that's been actually modified and dried in the sun and altered to look like a creature of some kind.
It
It has
legs and arms and an elongated skull.
Well,
Yeah.
it really does look so
It
extraordinary.
looks very
close.
alien, but it's just a skate.
Yeah.
And so people would make these and they would sell them at the ports and they would claim that they were sea creatures when in reality they were not.
Wow.
So, which gets me to the topic of the mermaid, and the biggest and most successful cryptid of all time is, of course, P.T. Barnum's Fiji mermaid.
Yeah.
So P.T. Barnum's Fiji mermaid was a huge exhibition in the middle of the 19th century. He had purchased the mermaid from a actual sea captain who had it made, okay? And he then took it on tour, and essentially that was what put P.T. Barnum on the map. I believe he charged $0.25, and the newspapers covered this. The scientific community came in to scrutinize it, but he made so much money off of this mermaid. And what it was the upper portion of a baboon sewed onto the lower portion of a fish, but done so expertly that people couldn't even see the seam. This is pre-X-ray. And he would have it on display under a dome. It had this. The original one is long gone, but it was in a standing position, and it had this face all coiled in agony. There's all sorts of sketches of it to show you what it would have looked like.
And it's what would have been known as a gaff.
It is a gaff, which means a fake.
Yeah.
But it didn't matter. He was able to dupe a lot of people into believing that this was a real mermaid that came from Fiji. And there was a fire in his Museum of Oddities in New York City, and people believed that the mermaid was destroyed in that fire. But ever since then, there's been many mermaid exhibits that have surfaced ever since then. In fact, there's even a lobby card of a photograph of the inside of P.T. Barnum's museum. There's only one or two known to exist of this lobby card. And there is something that he deemed the real mermaid, and it was a life-sized aquatic humanoid that was dried and in some sort of a display, but it was a full-sized merman. But there's no examples of this either in it being still in existence or even advertisements for it. So this thing did surface on a like an advertisement for his display back then, and no one really knows anything more about it. But this is something that, fascinated the public to no end. And it opened the doors for so many other things to come into the sideshow, including examples of the urban myths and the cryptozoological creatures like the Jersey Devil or the Chupacabra or any number of these things. Like, I remember going to New York in the 90s, and there was a place called the Auditorium, and they had a Chupacabra display with a dried Chupacabra wearing a sombrero and a, this sort of thing. But amazing, and when you take a little look closer, it's a dried skinned cat.
Oh.
But it still looked amazing. It still looked good, and there were still children looking at it and thinking it was real.
Yeah, and that's all that matters.
And that's all that matters. That's what the fun is about it. When I take a look at this, one of the most famous cryptids that we know, of course, here is the jackalope.
Jackalope. He's holding on to a jackalope mounted on. So what it looks like to me as a layman is a bunny rabbit with little horns.
Yeah.
Yep.
Very cute. And if that was a real animal, I'm sure it'd be dangerous as hell.
Oh yeah, and I would still be trying to hug it and kiss it and
touch it for
domesticate it.
It's cute.
Oh God.
Now, what is the origin of the jackalope?
So the jackalope was created by two brothers, and I'm going to actually have to ask you to open up your the computer and find out their names, because I didn't know I'd be asked this question.
Open up
and
your
I am
internet.
tired, and I've had a long week, and for the life of me, I know I'm not going to remember. But it was essentially invented and put on display in their business, in their hotel, and since then it's a jackrabbit with a
Fearsome critter.
Yeah, fearsome critter. So who are the names?
Douglas Herrick and his brother. They were hunters with taxidermy skills.
Yeah.
In South Dakota.
That's right.
Douglas, Wyoming was where it started. Actually, my bad.
So it is a fake, a gaff that is now one of the most
Got a life of its own.
famous.
Yep.
The jackalope. And I've seen many of these in my studies and touring around and going to sideshow museums. And recently in Dundas, Ontario, there was a beautiful jackalope for display. I didn't buy it. I should have bought it.
Yeah.
Such a nice piece.
One of the earliest video series that I saw was on America's Funniest Videos back in the 90s where they had a jackalope running around the country.
Oh my gosh.
And that was my introduction to cryptids, actually. I was a kid and I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And I was really disappointed to find out that that is not a real thing. Mm-hmm. But for me, it will always be real.
Well, also too, going back to mermaids, talking about the realness of these critters. Christopher Columbus, who can rot in hell, he actually thought 100,000% that he was seeing mermaids.
Sure.
Yep.
And he was banging them.
Yeah.
But it turns out they might have been manatees, which makes me really mad.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, not good.
I mean, they're not the prettiest ladies, but everybody needs love. But no, people have been talking about specifically water creatures since the dawn of time. I mean, look at the Norse culture. They thought that the Kraken was real. And they
Well,
had
the Kraken
big
is
stories.
real. It's a giant squid.
Well, I'm
Well,
freaking
look-
terrified of
Look at the giant squids off the coast of Japan. It's because
Massive
these creatures
giant
go right
squids.
back to the deep and you don't see them. And what they do is they live in your subconscious and your fears, which is why they
Yeah.
are so popular.
Could you imagine a giant squid's carcass washing up on shore
Yep.
in
The 1600s?
ancient Norway,
Yeah.
and the tails that would just emerge from this
They'd be like,
monster?
look at that creature. He's so big.
It's so big. Let's eat it.
Well, and you can imagine that the people in power would make up stories to suit their agendas.
Make 'em
as
scared.
well. Make them scared, make them controlled.
Let's hang it on a tree
No.
and make it rot, and it will be a delicacy.
Oh my goodness.
That's not Norway. That's
No.
where is that?
That's South Dakota.
That sounded like Sweden, kind of.
That is Sweden. Well, they have that fish
Hurdy-gurdy,
dish that's all
hurdy-gurdy.
rotted fish that you can eat.
Oh yeah, I think that's in Sweden. No
Sweden.
offense to Sweden.
No, I
but
think it's
we will-
Norway.
We will not be eating that.
I don't
I'm
know.
curious, are there any cryptids that have been quote unquote discovered in the 20th century?
Yes, and they're
Mothman.
real. Well, wait a sec. Are you
Oh,
talking
that's
about?
true.
Are you
He's
talking about a
so
cryptid that was
sexy.
invented in the 20th century?
Mothman.
Well, invented / discovered.
Okay, so there is
So
one
sexy.
cryptid that was deemed to be a fake that ended up being a real,
Oh.
and it was an African fish that was a fish from like the Jurassic period or from like millions of years ago. It's an armored fish. They thought that they were completely extinct, and that people would claim that they were still in the water, and yet then they ended up finding that they did still exist.
There's another
Really?
one. There's like rock, like the big eagles that you saw in like Lord of the Rings that
Sure.
would lift up creatures. There was actually
Yeah.
a bird called the elephant bird, which was bigger than an elephant.
That's right, the Thunderbird
Prehistoric,
too.
and the last time they were seen was like the
Civil War.
No, 1600s.
No, they had them in the Civil War
wow.
too.
But there's a full skeleton from the 1600s, so that was a real cryptid, and I did a TikTok about this, and I was so amazed. Loch Ness Monster, unfortunately, the guy faked it, but there could have been like a big snake in the
Could
water.
have been a snake or a
Yep.
log or
Yeah.
a drunk Scot.
But, yeah, probably. But no, the Mothman, first of all, if you see
Sure.
a statue, check out his ass.
That. Oh yes, I've heard.
Mummy
Oh yeah,
like-
that's
I've
right.
heard about
Mummy
his
likes
statue.
I like
that.
so much. But no, Mothman's kind of sexy.
Well, Mothman is from the 60s.
60s. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of drugs.
He was seen flying around,
That's how he's talking.
an abandoned area of town.
town.
And
Near a
He's
mine.
connected
Near a
to a
mine.
bridge disaster.
Yeah, he
if I remember
is.
correctly.
yeah,
But is he real?
I think, again, it's a cryptid. It's 50-50. Even with all the technology that we have today, the evidence, no matter how refutable it could be,
Yeah.
so there was
He
all
gets thrown
sorts
out.
of munitions and things like this that were put in storage around that area
Yeah.
in these little burrows that were sealed off, okay? And there's an urban myth that some of the things are radioactive and they got into the water stream and it created the Mothman. But what I think Mothman could be is essentially a guy in a hazmat suit that somebody
Oh.
saw
I'm down.
and thought it was a Mothman. Maybe he
Okay.
was up on a
They were doing drugs.
pole or
glowing red eyes.
who knows what he was doing. But they
Okay.
saw this guy in a hazmat suit or in some type of a suit for working in that area, and then went back to town. And from what I understand, the sheriff came out and they did an investigation, and there was no such Mothman. And ever since then, people have been claiming to see him. And then in that town, they even have an annual Mothman day.
Yeah, I want to go.
I knew about that.
Yeah, and so Mothman has become this big thing for that town. I mean, that's
It's their moneymaker.
Yeah. Wow. Hey, question, and Liz, you might know this from watching my TikToks. I'm a big fan of Batboy.
Yes.
Is Batboy classified as a cryptid?
I think he is. I think he's a modern cryptid, and it's done in a tongue-in-cheek manner.
A boy with bat DNA.
Yeah, he is anthropomorphic. He is definitely the very definition of what that
he's a
would
And
be.
those arms, am I right?
For me, it's the fangs.
You know, he lives in a cave.
hot.
He is a bat boy. Yeah, he's a cryptid.
He's a social media darling. That's what he is.
And if you're out there, bat boy, you know where I am.
I
You
have
gotta
his
find me.
contact. I've told you this
Come
before.
at me, baby boy.
Hashtag call me.
Yeah, exactly.
Hashtag bat me, baby.
Yeah.
Actually, hashtag DM me.
I think the pandemic has gotten to us.
Yeah, oh,
We're all for
definitely.
Bat Boy.
Couple more honorary mentions, of course, is the Jersey Devil.
Yeah.
Right?
Tore a strip out of New Jersey in the late 1700s.
For a while.
For a while.
The Ridgeway Phantom.
Ridgeway Phantom.
that's
Not
true.
technically a cryptid, technically a ghost, but he caused quite a few deaths. People were scared to death. A famous doctor died because he was scared to death of it.
Wow.
Yeah.
was
Someone
appalling.
that you love is Spring Heel Jack.
Spring Heel Jack's an
turned
interesting
everybody
one.
as well.
He's wonderful.
So Spring Heel Jack's an interesting character.
In England.
Yeah, so in the 1830s, 1840s, this demon would appear in the streets, jump over walls,
Jaunty.
But not in the sheets.
and frighten women,
Yep.
and they would run off. He would never harm anybody. There was one instance, though, where he knocked on someone's door. They opened the door, his glowing blue eyes, and he shot fire out of his hands and ran off. And it caused such a stir that he was dubbed Spring-Heeled Jack by the media. Of course, Jack means it's almost like our John Doe.
Yeah.
So they're the spring-heeled unknown. And he was essentially hunted by the locals. They were looking for him.
I've seen pictures. He looks dastardly.
He looks actually, if you
Kinda
guys
cute,
a second here, look up Spring Heel Jack right now.
And his mustache.
And you'll notice that one of the earliest illustrations of him from a Penny Dreadful, which is an old British magazine, he looks exactly and is posed exactly like Batman. And I think that Batman, Bob Kane, and they all looked at Spring Heel Jack and said, no, that's an idea. Let's take it. Let's modify it. Let's make it into Batman. It is exactly what he is. He has the wings. He has the horns, the whole shebang. But he was described as like wearing an oilskin outfit with wings, and he had like this helmet with fiery eyes.
You know, I clubbed with a guy like that once.
Do you know what's really funny about that?
It's amazing.
In Mineral Point, Wisconsin, and I've done a YouTube video about this at length, there was a vampire that struck in the 1980s and the 2000s. He strikes every 20 years.
Yep.
Where there's like literally a guy that jumps a 10-foot fence. And they say that he skulks around cemeteries and he's kind of like spooky looking. Like he kind of looks like Nosferatu, but a little bit bit warmer.
Buddy, if you're listening, let us know in advance so we can do a live with you.
Holla at your girl.
We'll do a live.
He attacked people on a boat and he left thousands of dollars of fishing gear, but he stole their flashlight.
Oh. Okay, don't attack people on a boat, but let us know. We'll have 3-point lighting ready for you and a really great sound.
Holla at your girl.
Yeah.
You know, before we go, there is one last cryptid, and it is Toronto-based. And it's from Cabbagetown. It's the Toronto Tunnel Monster.
Right.
So in the 1970s, there was a guy who was keeping kittens, and one of them wandered off, and he went looking for the cat, and he ended up finding a small opening into the underwater reservoirs of Toronto. You got to understand, Toronto's actually built on a series of rivers, so there's a lot of areas of the city that have lakes or rivers underneath.
Right.
And literally, there's just a piece of brick over it, and then they just build on top. So he found one of these sort of openings, and he went in, and what he described was a 3-foot-long, hairless, gray, monkey-like creature that screamed and growled at him, shouting, "Get out!" and scurried away into the darkness, and it terrorized him. And he didn't even take it to the media. He went home terrified, told his wife, who told her friend, who knew someone at the Toronto Sun. And then the person came to their house, and he wanted to remain anonymous. He kept it anonymous, but he swore by it that there was this Toronto Tunnel Monster. And there's all sorts of urban myths around that area.
You should go look for it.
Yeah.
I've gone to the spot where it should
Let's go
be.
again.
But yeah, the Toronto Tunnel Monster, or the Cabbagetown Tunnel Monster, is a Toronto cryptid. And there's all sorts of urban myths that there's some sort of a magnetic energy coming out of that area of the city, and it causes traffic accidents, and it causes all sorts of issues. Yeah, we can go check it out. We'll find the location. I know where the location is and where the building would be, but I think it's been changed so much in the last 50 years. I don't know if that opening is still there.
Yeah,
Maybe.
we could try it
You
out.
bring a shovel.
I'm open to the experience.
Yeah.
Well, kids, that's our show today. Liz, thank you so much for joining us. How do people find you if they want to hear you more?
Thank you so much for having me here. You can find me on YouTube at Planet Lizdom, Lizzddom. That's my version of wisdom. I air live every Thursday at 8 p.m. In fact, January 6th, we are going to have a special guest, one of my favorite Canadian celebrities. You're going to have to tune in to find out.
Ooh, I'm excited. I'll be there.
And I have a little cryptid here of a leprechaun.
Oh.
Which we can talk about. We can talk about the wee folk on another episode.
I'd love to, yeah.
But there are so many different types of cryptids that we can explore. This will be just a part one of many on the subject matter.
We will definitely talk about that in the future.
In the future. And be sure to check out our Patreon with sponsorship levels, everything from $1 all the way up to a full sponsorship for your content, your brand, your company, whatever it is you would like us to talk about on the podcast and advertise with a joint...
Ooh, and we also have our TikTok.
Well, what's the number? The joint number of how many followers? Almost 250,000 followers between us to get your brand out there.
And you can follow Dr. Mysterion on TikTok. You're at
Planet Lizdom on TikTok.
And at Catherine the Great on TikTok.
So be sure to check those out, subscribe, and we will see you in our favorite place, the future. Stay spooky.
Ooh.